Julian, are you going to introduce this episode?
I can. Today we're talking about the absolute basics, introduction to Niagara and VFX concepts overview.
Okay, so where we left off in the last episode was we had created a new project in Unreal for us to play in. We were using the first-person template that Unreal provides, and we'd gone over a really brief overview of how to navigate, how to play the game, how to shoot the weapon in the game, and then also we'd created our effects folder. We're going to pick it up from here. Before we do that, I have a really, really fundamental and important question for you, Julian.
Okay.
What is an effect?
What is an effect?
What is a VFX?
Indeed. What is a VFX? Indeed. To my knowledge, VFX are sort of all the things outside of the actual character models or the environment models, the things that bring the world to life.
Until we work together.
Is that a good?
Yeah,
is that a good?
You've been around us a little bit.
Yeah, the way that I hope I know a thing or two.
The way that I usually describe what I do, frankly, even like to my mother, is everything that moves in a game that's not a character, a vehicle, or a weapon is probably going to come through some form of a visual effects department. We use an abstract set of tools, and you'll see it in this tutorial, to connect all the dots to create motion. Julian, you actually said beautifully, we bring a lot of life to the rest of the world, usually in secondary things, but most of what we're dealing with for most of those tasks is particle simulations. And that's going to be things like your explosions, your fire, blood, rain, snow, leaves blowing, and dust motes in the air, and sometimes light rays coming in through windows.
Rain.
Yeah, everything else. So the tool that we use within Unreal is called Niagara. I think I phrased that interestingly because we're already in a tool called Unreal, but Unreal itself is comprised of a lot of different sub-tools for specific skill sets. The one for visual effects is called Niagara. So we have this empty folder. I'm going to right click, and right up at the top you can see that there's Niagara system. This is also just a shortcut for the effects menu, and over here there's all these different things that we can create for Niagara. I guarantee you're not going to use most of them for most of your prominent thriving career as a visual effects artist. We can just go to Niagara system. So when I do that, I get this prompt, and I can choose to create it from something else, inherit behaviors from another effect, copy existing systems, etc. I'm just going to start empty. We're going to start very fresh. That obviously creates a new node in my content browser. Again, that's a new file on my Windows Explorer. I'm going to name it really quick. So what do you want our system to be called?
The baby system. I'm sticking to that file naming structure.
Actually, we want our name to be explicit to what it actually is. We're making a grenade explosion.
Okay,
Let's call
sorry,
it a grenade
you're
explosion.
right.
Okay, so I use NS underscore as a prefix saying it's a Niagara system underscore grenade explosion.
I imagine that helps with searchability. If you need to find Niagara systems, you could just do NS.
It does. There's also so many awesome ways to search in Unreal that it's not the only way, but it's super helpful because, you know, a game is going to be thousands, if not millions of files.
That makes sense.
Now, when we open this up, we're going to actually open up that brand new tool, Niagara. It's going to be a little bit overwhelming, and it's a totally new set of properties and windows. So here we are. This is the Niagara Editor. Once again, there's a lot of things that we don't necessarily need to pay attention to. So the very first thing that we do need to pay attention to is this grid area. This is going to be where we build out all the emitters and control all our properties. On the right-hand side, when I actually select something, is the properties window. So we're going to be tinkering a lot in here. What we don't necessarily need right now is the timeline. I don't really use the timeline to press play because I can preview it in other ways. And so I'm just going to go ahead and minimize this for now and make it small. We're also not going to dive into the parameters today. There's a ton of potential in playing with and manipulating these parameters, but for the sake of this, we're just going to close it. On the left-hand side is our viewport. You can orbit around with the left mouse button. And if we had an effect playing, then this is what we would actually see. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click in here and say add an emitter. And I'm going to skip ahead a tiny bit just so we can see something. And I'm just going to say that we're going to start with a fountain. Unreal is going to go ahead and create this default emitter, which is a fountain. And now you can see that I've got particles playing up in here. I'm using a lot of terms here. I think I want to pause for a quick second. Actually, let's do one more thing. This is the Niagara system playing in the viewport. Now, if I want to place it in my level so that I can actually see it in the level, I just drag it out here. Fly down to it, and you can see that I have placed an actor with a Niagara system playing particles. If I play the game, there it is. Right? Nice and easy.
It's very cool.
Okay. let's pause Unreal and let's go to the old digital whiteboard of Photoshop. And what I want to do is start working with you on some basic concepts. So I've used the phrase actor with you. I've already kind of explained it, but an actor is going to be the container. So if this is our level, that actor I place, and it gives me the manipulators so that I can move it around, right? Mm-hmm. That actor can contain things. And so in this case, the actor is containing our Niagara system. Now, you can think of the Niagara system as a collection of all the different parts and properties. So the Niagara system in this case is our gigantic explosion. And not only is it the smoke cloud and mushroom cloud, but it's also the streaks and the rocks and the fire and whatever else that you think of as the effect in whole. That when your designer says, hey, I just want to turn on the explosion, that's the entire Niagara system. The individual components of that, and this is where this explosion analogy kind of falls apart a little bit, but we can think of those as the emitters and the particles. Okay, I'm gonna scroll over here to the side, just give myself a little bit more drawing space because we're gonna switch analogies. You can think of an emitter as a hose. Think of your garden hose. Let's see if I can draw a garden hose really fast. There we go. Okay, the garden hose is your emitter, and it controls the amount of flow of particles. So the rate, it controls the direction, right? You can point it differently. But once the water has left the garden hose, it's no longer affected by the emitter. In this case, in this analogy, the water are particles. Now, particles are simply points in 3D space that are simulating based off of physics. Like I said, the emitter defines some of their initial properties, but each of these particles is also going to have its own velocity, its own drag. Does it get affected by gravity? Does it get affected by turbulence? Does it collide with things, etc.? They are spawning and then simulating independently and often don't really know about each other. Finally, each of those particles has a component renderer, and we can attach things to them. So the classic thing that we do is on every one of these particles, we just attach a camera-facing quad. This is called a sprite or a billboard. The cool thing about them being camera-facing is that no matter which way you look at it, that quad, that sprite, is going to rotate, and so it looks like it's a 3D object, but it's always just a completely flat plane. We can obviously do a lot of things with that flat plane. We'll dig into that more. But other things that we can often attach to these particles are meshes. So if I had a rock, we could attach lights. We can also attach decals if we wanted to do like blood spots and things like that that project onto surfaces. I don't know how I would draw that here, so I'll skip drawing that one. And then finally, there's a couple really cool types of mesh renderers that we can do that kind of connect the dots. So there's ribbons and beams, which would literally just connect the dots and form a geometric trail between all your particles in different ways and give you different types of controls.
So for example, here we could dictate that the particle coming out of the emitter could, for example, be one of those blue cube meshes in the basic level.
Absolutely.
And we could just spawn.
We could spawn an explosion of blue cubes.
Got it.
Yep. Okay, so those are the individual components, and we're going to dive a lot more into the language of what those mean in practice as we start working together. But there's one more general prerequisite concept that I need to explain about emitters and particles. And so if I give myself a new blank area on my whiteboard, when we talk about emitters and particles, we talk about them in terms of their lifespan. It's a little bit heartless, but we actually talk about their birth and their death and their life. And so what we actually do is we create a timeline. So if I spawn an effect, that Niagara system, and it starts at 1 and it goes for 6 seconds.
Starts at 0.
So you're right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then if I come over here and I turn on my emitter at frame 1, this is the birth of the emitter. And if I let the emitter have a lifespan of 5 seconds, then it is going to turn off or die at frame 6. Those are important things to note because we have the birth and the death, and the lifespan of this is 5 seconds. So these are the animation timelines that we're going to actually use because we want to be able to control the individual emitters independently from the effect in whole. This is also true of the individual particles. And so what you're going to see is that once we spawn particles, we're going to give them a lifespan. And so they're going to spawn at random points along the emitter's timeline, and they're all going to live out their individual independent lifespans. We're probably going to give them a random range so that we don't see patterns and popping and things like that. And all the animations are going to be defined between the birth and death of that individual particle. So if I do things like fade out the particle over its lifespan, you're going to see me animating a curve where 0 on that curve, on the x-axis, that's the birth, and 1 on that x-axis is the death. Okay? Make sense?
And so just to kind of put this into practice, these are hose metaphor.
Yeah.
And so essentially what we're talking about here is if we took a real garden hose and say pointed it straight up and we turned on the water, that would essentially be the lifespan of our emitter.
Yep.
And we can turn off the hose, which would be the death of the emitter, but we might still have water in the air.
Absolutely.
Falling.
Still simulating.
That would be the lifespan of our particles.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Now, in the real world, that water doesn't really die. It hits the
Sure,
ground.
sure.
Yeah. But yes, that is a perfect summary of the analogy.
Got it.
All right, so that's the drawing bit of this tutorial. Let's go back to Niagara. And I want to dive just a little bit more. We're still slow. We're going to go through what the actual properties are because there's a really important organizational schema that Niagara uses that once you understand, it starts to make things a little bit more comfortable because there's a lot of properties in Niagara. So if I come back over here and I maximize my fountain, there's this blue node here. This is the properties for all of the system in whole. Okay, and so the ones that I'm typically going to control are really down at the bottom where I've got a loop behavior and then a loop duration. And what I'm saying is that this entire system is going to keep looping forever, infinitely, for 5 seconds. I can also simply turn this to loop once, and then it will spawn. I have to come over here to the emitter as well and set it to read from the system.
Got it.
Now that I've done that, this will spawn and play for 5 seconds and then turn off and never turn on again until it's previewing to turn on again. But in the level out here, you can see that it's no longer playing. Now's a good time for me to say this. If you ever want to make your effect play in the level again with Niagara selected, you just press the space bar. And so you can see it's going to spawn for 5 seconds and then turn off. That's really useful for production effects. For now, let's just go ahead and leave it on. So this blue node, you're going to see this in every Niagara system. There's only one in every Niagara system, and it's where all of the system's properties are set. So global thing is you want to share between all of your different emitters. This stack right here is an emitter. I can have as many emitters as I want. I can copy and paste these. I could create new ones. And as you can see, each one is now just spawning more and more particles because they're just a complete duplicate. There is a cost, obviously, like I don't want to have 300 emitters running, and in fact, it might just get a little bit expensive and slow down your frame rate, but effectively you can have as many emitters as you want.
And so when you say cost, you mean in relation to the bandwidth of the game being able to,
Yeah. We want our games, it's a game, and so it needs to run at a certain frame rate as opposed to 1 frame every 2 minutes.
Sure.
And so that's where performance comes in. We won't really dive into that here. Just know that like the more you push things excessively, potentially the harder it is for the computer to process it.
Sure.
So if we just go back and look at one individual emitter here, we're going to start to see some of the language that I had mentioned. I can actually zoom in more for you. So up at the very top is our name of the emitter. We have this really cool toggle where I can turn it on and off. And then if I had multiple emitters, let me just go ahead and duplicate another emitter. You can select this little guy here, and it's just going to preview only this one emitter, and it's no longer playing this. You can't really tell because they're the same. Below that, we get all of the sort of global properties of the emitter. And then we have these states. These are logical states, and so I want to call these out. Everywhere that you see this little plus sign, there's the orange ones for emitters and green ones for particles. These are parent categories, if you will, of properties. So if we look at the top, we've got emitter spawn. This is going to be all the properties that we define on frame 1 of turning on that emitter. We don't use this that often because I usually want to just go ahead and define those things for the entire time the emitter is on, but you can. The emitter update is the rest of the lifespan of that emitter. And so as you can see here, I've got my spawn rate defined where it's saying it's going to spawn 50 particles per second. Down below that, we have the particle spawn. Again, this is on the birth of every single individual particle. What are their properties? And under this, you can see that we have things like the lifespan, the size, color, rotation, etc. The velocity, where is it coming from? And then there's the particle update state, which is what are the behaviors of these particles once they are living out their lifetime? And so under this, we have gravity, we have drag, It's growing and changing color. It's simulating. And then the final one down below is where we actually define what type of component is rendering on that particle. In this case, as with most of the effects that we're going to do, we're going to use a sprite renderer. And this is where we would actually decide which material or picture is drawing on that sprite and all the rest of the sort of sprite behaviors.
Just for fun, can we make our particles hot pink?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go all the way. Well, actually, let me ask you, where would I do that? You want them hot pink at birth, right?
Yes. So particle spawn?
Yeah. So I know from prior experience that that's under the initialized particle track. And over here we have our lifespan. Actually, I'm going to start at the top on our way down to making them pink. So lifespan is a really important one. It's defining how long these live. And so I can come over here and make it really tiny, and you can see that now they die very, very quickly. Or I can make it really long, and you can see that they'll just fall all the way down into oblivion. So we can probably just keep that at like 1 and 2. I guess I'm kind of happy with that. The next one here is color. This is, right now we're using direct set. And so I can actually just come over here and make them pink. And now I've got hot pink. Every single property has this little option box where we can sort of define different options. And then every option within that has this drop down where we can get really complicated and basically build complex expressions and controls and tie things together, etc. This is where the true power of Niagara comes out, because you can tie attributes together to different types of behaviors, which is really, really fun and beautiful. Way too complex for what we're doing right now. And also you don't need to use it most of the time. So with color, if I wanted to, I could go ahead and say random range, and I could pick 2 colors. So I'll keep your hot pink and give me a second color, Julian.
Let's do like our Beyond FX teal.
Ooh, hot pink and teal.
Somewhere in our
Okay.
teal range.
All right.
So very nice complementary colors.
Okay. There we go.
So kind of splits. It spawns based on that range of colors.
Yeah, exactly. Now, under here we have a bunch of extra properties for our colors. We can choose to separate out the alpha or link them all together. We can randomize the individual channels. So right now it's just picking between these 2 colors. If I randomize between the 2 channels, then I'm going to get more or less the full rainbow between them on that color with. If I keep going, we're going to ignore mass for the most part, position, but we have a couple other ones like these size. Right now it's on a random uniform, so I get to pick between 2 values for the size. Uniform means that the aspect ratio of my circle is uniform. It's always going to be a perfect circle. I could do non-uniform, and then I get an X and Y scale independently. So how big do you want this to be? Right now there's 6 and 12.
Let's do, can we do a lot of variants? So maybe like 2 and 20.
2 and 20, yeah.
Just think it's for visualization. It's
go
nice to
bigger.
do extremes. So maybe like 2 and 50.
Let's go bigger.
100. I like it.
Yeah, 2 and 100. All right. I've almost got like a soft bokeh effect going.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, very photographic.
The fun thing about this, and this is where like I challenge that visual effects is somewhat easy to learn, is that as we're tinkering with things, we can immediately see the output of it, right? And so you can just go in and say like, I have no idea what that does, and try it. Sometimes you still won't see what it did, but most of the time you will see an impact right away, and you can start to learn very quickly what works and what doesn't. And then it just becomes trial and error and tinkering until you get something that you like. Down below this, we have sprite rotation. We have circles on our sprites, so we wouldn't see this, so I'll leave that alone. But let's keep looking a little bit further. Actually, let's go back up to the emitter. I'd mentioned the spawn rate. Right now it's set to 50, and that is particles per second. So if I set this to 1, then we will get 1 particle spawning per second.
Very lonely particle.
It is. It's kind of just a sad little sizzle. You can go absurd. Wow. And the cool thing about this is that you can actually stack other types of controls along with your spawn rate. So I can also come over here and do a spawn burst. And now what I'm doing is, instead of spawning the number of particles per second, let's set this back to like 50, I can also say that on frame 0 of this emitter, I want to also spawn 500 particles. And so now we get that little burst at the beginning, and that it continues playing out 50. With all of these properties, they all have individual checkboxes, and so I can just turn off one of them, and now I just keep...
You just get the burst. Got it.
Yep. So let's keep going with our spawn rate. I want to just run through some really basic controls that we're always going to tinker with. So the next one that I want to look at with you is our velocity. In this case, I'm using the add velocity property, and you can define linear, where you're just directly saying like, I want it to go up, or in this case, down by 50 units per second. I can do it from a point, which is kind of cool because it's going to create a spread. It's just sort of spherical velocity outward from a point. And then I can do things like I can offset that point down below, and I can kind of create that spread again. Obviously, I can change the speed. So Julian, right now, they're going quite fast. I think I've got 500 to 800. I could go slower. And then gravity is going to set in, or I can go 5,000, and then they're shooting way up there.
Looks like cotton candy a little bit.
Yeah, it does. I'll set this back to something reasonable again. And then let's keep going down. We're going to go look at that gravity force. So right now we have gravity sets in negative 980. Do you have any idea why they chose that number?
No.
So Unreal's units are in centimeters, and the actual force of gravity here on Earth is roughly negative 9.8 meters per second. So they're trying to simulate actual gravity for that one, but I can set it to be slower. I can do negative 50, and then you'll eventually see that I'm just slowing this down. I can also make it positive so the particles lift up further and just go 500. And you can see they're accelerating upwards. I'll just do negative 500.
And just for the sake of it, seeing it, what happens if we hit 0? Do they just...
Yeah,
they just sort of exist?
I can also just toggle this off.
Oh.
So now because we're giving them that velocity at birth, they're just going to keep going in that direction.
I see.
Now there is a drag. Now drag, if you've never played with any simulation tools, it's friction. It's just trying to say slow down. So if I turn this off, then what you'll see is that the velocity of these particles actually just continues exactly the same. There's nothing changing or impacting them. If I turn on drag, it's like a little bit of air drag or friction, and so it slows down over its lifetime. If I crank this up to be a lot higher, not that high, not even that high, you'll see that they'll come to a stop. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, let me go back and change our scale a tiny bit again so that we're smaller and we can see them. Actually, I'm even going to remove the randomness from this. So we will just do uniform at 10. So every single particle right now is the exact same size. This is great because I can show you what animating them does. In this case, we have a curve that's already predefined for the color, and the alpha is controlled to fade out. So if you recall, what I said is 0 on a curve on the x-axis is the birth, and 1 on a curve on the x-axis is the death. In this case, the alpha, which is the transparency, is set to roughly 1 at the beginning, which is why we can see it, and then it slowly fades out to 0 and transparent at the very end. We're going to go ahead and do the exact same thing on size. So I'm going to add a module, and we're going to scale sprite size. Find it. There we go, scale sprite size. And now what we can see is the default curve actually starts off at 0 at birth and 1 at death. And so you can see the particle is teeny, teeny, tiny. As it lives out its life, it grows. I can go in here and I can change these values to be whatever I want. So if I want it to be 5 and then shrink, let's go smaller so we can see it. It starts out bigger and then it slowly shrinks down to 0. I've just inverted it.
Awesome.
Cool. There's this really cool multiplier on the bottom that I find that I use all the time because it's just a handy control right here. It multiplies everything else that I've said and all the other randomness. So if I had gone back and had random variation in my initial spawn size, I go back to random uniform and I've got that 2 by 15 again. And now the art director comes by and says, hey, I really want for all of these to be twice as big. You don't have to go back and change the 2 and the 15. You can just type 2. And you still keep that random range. And it just multiplies your curve out. The other beautiful thing about this curve is that we can actually change what we call easing of this curve. Now, linear curves tend to look bad. They don't really feel good in animation. And so what we want to typically do is give them some form of easing. So we could reset this so that it grows. It starts off small and then it grows quite quickly and then eases out. This is usually what we would do for an explosion if we want to pop, right? I could also come over here and get manual control of these handles and control it myself. I could add or remove around keyframes. I typically like to try to use the least number of keyframes needed.
Sure.
And so I'll often play with handles, and you can make some cool squiggly shapes out of this.
That's really cool.
Yeah. This is still fun tinkering. It's maybe hard to see how this is necessarily useful. What does always help me is not using the viewport, but actually looking in Niagara directly, or sorry, in the Unreal viewport directly, you can kind of just see it in context. And again, you could always come back over here and play.
I would imagine this to be like if we were on a plane of ferries and they had a sort of, I don't know, like a steam vent. It's like a ferry. This is like a ferry particle steam vent.
Yeah, it's where the unicorns are.
Unicorn
are boiling their suit.
Yes, exactly.
Or weapon pickups. If this was a little bit slower, it's maybe a little too fast. But like if I slow this down and we're in a very vibrant fairy world, this could be a weapon pickup effect.
And I may be jumping ahead a little bit here, but if we were to replace the particle with our, I believe the term is sprite, like a flat image, if we replace it with like a plus sign and made them green, perhaps it could be sort of a health indicator.
Absolutely. So what we have is already, like, you can start to see that by using these controls, we would get to actual production effects. So I feel like where we're at right now is a pretty good basic overview of all the individual things that we need to be comfortable with so we can start to trickle around. And I think it's a good way to end this current episode. With the next episode, what I want to start doing is diving into making an actual production effect. And we're going to start with a spark burst from that grenade explosion. But we're going to try to make it feel good and dig into how to control some sparks and then keep layering on more and more detail from there.
We'd love it if you guys could subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also check out our socials, follow us on social. All those links are below in the description, as well as on our website, beyondfx.com. And we have amazing educational content coming every week, not only just these tutorials, but also quick tips for various different VFX needs and different engines, and all sorts of cool stuff. So definitely check that out.